Hello, everyone. It is a social work month. So happy social work month to all my social workers out there. And I am excited to be doing this interview today. I am talking with Ashlye. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself and we are going to get straight into this conversation. So, Ashlye, you have the floor.
Hey, thanks. I'm happy to be here with you, Tiffany. So my name is Ashlye. I am a native Angelino. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I live here now. Well, again, after living in DC for several years, and I'm a proud HBCU alumna as well. So I think those are just like some of the basics of who
Right.
Ashlye is,
HU.
and a social worker. So.
So what I really want to talk about is I met Ashlye and we started talking about what we had in common. And so we started talking about our social work journeys. And so I was super, super interested to hear about her journey because some of the things that I aspire to do, she has already done or has kind of worked in the field. And she has where she is now. I love where she's at now. It's not your traditional social work. So let's start off with the basics. So I know you said that you went to an HBCU. So tell us more about your background in terms of your education. Was your undergrad degree in social work? Was your master's degree in social work? Let us know a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of jump into some of the fields that you've gone into since school has ended.
Sure. So I went to Hampton. I majored in psychology.
Mhm.
And that was really my interest. My interest was psychology. I didn't really have any intentions of actually going to graduate school and getting a master's in social work. That was something that came about once I had already been working in the field of mental health for a couple of years. I had a supervisor and mentor who educated me a little bit more about the versatility of MSW degree program, and also about kind of licensing and what that means and how it is important to make sure you go to a program that supports being licensed by a board if you want to go the route of being a licensed clinician. My initial route was forensic psychology, and forensic psych master's programs did not fit the criteria for licensing. And at the time, I wanted to be a licensed clinical person. So I decided to take the route that would allow me to become licensed, but also a route that I had heard was relatively versatile. And I didn't really know what that meant at first.
Okay, so I was gonna let's talk about that right there. Versatility. When you talk about a master's in social work, what makes it versatile? Because I hear this question all the time from marriage and family therapists. They're like, should I do MFT? Should I do MSW? Should I get a psych degree? So when you talk about versatility, what does that mean for people that don't know?
Um, when I initially think about it, I can think about it how my graduate school separated it. So entering into the MSW program, you at some point you're going to choose if you're going to go the clinical route or the macro route. The
Mhm.
clinical route is kind of your traditional therapy, clinical work, working with specific like children or working with the aging community. So you're going to focus on the individual. Macro social work is broad. It looks at looks at things through that kind of larger view or that 30,000-foot view. You're focusing not only on individuals and their wellness and ability to thrive, but you're looking at communities, you're looking at cities. You are probably working within different countries even. So it's very much a more broad view of.
And right, and then also policy work, writing the rules, different things. So you're kind of behind the scenes. If you want to look at it like a camera, you're behind the scenes versus in front of the scenes. That's another way that I think of macro as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, being that it is so broad and you are focusing on a larger community, that definitely can include writing policy. It can include lobbying. It can include careers in politics, really a grassroots focus. Is one of some of the things that you can think about when it comes to macro social work.
Absolutely. There is a list that probably comes out around this time every year. and it is about 50 different careers that you can have in social work. And I love to see that floating around, because I just want people to know what the possibilities are out there. So starting your journey after your MSW, one of the things that we discussed was international social work. And so I really, really love that topic because I think Ashlye travels, I travel. And so incorporating that into something, our degree, or that we're already getting paid for, is something that I'm super excited about. I heard about it in undergrad at Cal State Long Beach. And so when I was talking to Ashlye, she said that she has done international social work. So can you talk a little bit about your experience doing that, and where were you located at?
Yeah, so I did international social work while I was earning my MSW. So when you do get an MSW, there is a requirement to do field placement. My first year, I was placed in DC Superior Court with probate court specifically, and I worked with adults who were assigned guardians. The second year, my university had an opportunity to do some more kind of macro international social work, and there was two options. It was London and India. I'm sure London is great, but I decided to go for India because I really wanted an opportunity to live abroad and experience something totally unlike what I knew to be my everyday life. So I went to Kochi, India, and I lived there for 5 months, and completed coursework in addition to my field placement for my MSW. The one thing that I really did like about being there was that I was able to do rotations similar to what someone would do maybe like in med school. So I wasn't just assigned to one location for the 5 months. I was able to go through rotations and work with different populations, work with different professions, and also look at different like avenues of social work.
I absolutely love that. So going into a grad school at Hampton, did you know that they offer this program, or it just kind of came about while you were in school?
No, so when I went onto the website to actually do my application, I saw this picture of this girl riding an elephant, like on the like top banner part of the website, and I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And it said something like international whatever field placement, and I was like, "I don't even know exactly what this is, but I'm gonna do that." And literally, this is when I was applying, so I didn't even know that I had got into the school yet, but I was like, "I'm gonna do that." So I ended up getting into the grad program clearly. And my first semester, the like chairperson of that program was my professor.
No.
So it was like the first day of class, I was like, hey, you're the person who's over the international India field placement. I want to do this. It was too early, in my grad school career to apply, but she was definitely like, oh, I'm so grateful you're interested. Like, let's talk about it. I'll let you know when we have our info session and like when it was an appropriate time to apply. So I did that and I applied and I got accepted.
That is so cool. So I was actually, when I was looking at grad schools, I was looking at that to be my criteria. And so it said that Howard had a component of this. Howard did not have a component of this actually. But what we were able to do like a short spring break, which is nothing compared to what you did. So I would have loved the opportunity to kind of immerse into the culture. We did go to Cape Town, which was cool. We were there for 10 days. We were able to shadow some of the other social workers in South Africa, which was interesting to see, their case. I feel like we complain about our caseload. Their caseload was huge. We went to like a children's center. We went to a teen center. So there were several different places. We got a chance to go to Parliament. So it was like really cool. So imagine if that 10 days could have turned into something like you did. I think that would have been absolutely cool. And now you have me wanting to suggest the idea to see if they would even be open to it now. But anyway, tell me a little bit more about some of your rotations that you did in your 5 months in India.
Yeah, so I went to an elementary school. Well, actually, the college that I was like an exchange student at, they were not only a college, but they had like primary school on campus. So I got to work with some of the kids who were in primary school that did have learning disabilities. they had an additional like class period that they would go to receive assistance with academic work. So generally they would have to forfeit like one of the more fun classes or electives like dance, and they would go, you know, to this class and have an opportunity to work on some of the subjects that they may have been having some troubles in based on their learning disability. I had the opportunity to also work with a child psychiatrist. So I really sat on his sessions, and we would talk about the session afterwards. Even during the sessions, he would ask me for my, you know, clinical opinion about what was going on. So it was a really collaborative opportunity that I feel like was great to have, especially with a psychiatrist in a different country.
Right.
But
Yeah,
also
how I
we
was like,
really
how is that coming from perspective of therapy and psychology coming from another country? Is that something that people would utilize a lot out there? Or like what is their perspective? I know in the Black community, trying to get people to see a therapist or a psychiatrist, it's a negative connotation. So I'm wondering, how does that work in India?
I think that it's similar to America in the space that there's stigma associated with mental illness. There's stigma associated with going to a therapist or psychiatrist, receiving medication. That is no different. I think that just like in America, there are certain groups, maybe it's because of access, education, that you're more likely to engage in services like that. And because also this was with children, you know, things differ a little bit more with children. When children are involved, there's multiple like organizations or agencies or departments that are involved in child care. So I think that that also was a contributing factor. And to think about kids are at school all day. If they have a learning disability, they're going to get an assessment. They're going to recommend interventions. And as a parent, it's your responsibility to engage with those recommended interventions. And so that increases the likelihood that you will, you know, engage in services. And that's the type of environment that it was. But of course, this is not to say that there is no stigma. Of course, there's thoughts about like if you're crazy or what, you know, what mental illness does and how it can impact you. Um, in addition to that work, I was able to do occupational therapy with children and adults. And also, I did a rotation in an inpatient mental hospital, working with folks who were having, you know, an episode and they needed to be hospitalized. This may have been their fifth episode, it may have been their first. So that was really great to work in that space. One of the things I got to see was a different way that India approaches mental illness in the space of when you're going through an episode that's traumatic. It can be traumatic for you, it can be traumatic for your family and friends. So instead of ripping you out of your home or whatever safe space you have for involuntary hospitalization and making you get better kind of siloed, this hospital, they allow your family to stay with you. So if you're married and you had an episode and needed to be hospitalized, your spouse would be able to come and stay in a room with you. And they would be there throughout that treatment process to see what it is for you to recover and what rehabilitation is going to look like for you long term. So that was a really great component that I think that the US could adopt, and probably help more people and work on decreasing stigma, especially like within familial units.
So it sounds like you were able to do, or was it every month you were able to switch to a new rotation?
Um, some of them were month long, some of them were weeks long. It kind of
Okay.
varied. One of the other things about this cultural exchange is that you learn that Americans are really kind of like tied to time and they are very strict and punctual. That is not something that carries over to Indian culture, even in the workspace, in the academic space. Sometimes folks are late. It's not a big deal. Nobody comes in saying like, sorry, you know, blah blah blah. It's just like, okay, I'm here now, so let's get started. It's not, it's not that. So that was a little bit of the schedule was a lot more flexible and not traditional for me as an American student.
Okay. So what was the cost of the program, and were you alone or were there other students in India with you?
Ooh, the cost. That was a minute ago. So I didn't pay anything extra outside of
It was like
a
regular
plane
tuition.
ticket. Yeah,
Okay.
I paid for a plane ticket. I paid my regular tuition. Of course, I had, just like I would in America, I had to eat and go out and entertain myself and buy clothes. So all of that stuff was on me. But it was just the cost of tuition, which in the end was probably kind of a win, because tuition at the school that I went to in India, it was far less than what my American tuition was. And they like paid my tuition in India and probably had like some surplus. I don't know what they did with it, but but it's the truth. And they provided meals also. Like I was provided breakfast, lunch, and dinner like on campus. I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
always eat it, but it was provided and it was a part of the like tuition, like room and board.
Okay, so you were also taking classes on that campus
I was
in
doing
addition.
coursework, yeah. So
Oh, okay, okay, okay. So what classes do you remember? I know it was a while ago. Do you remember what classes you were taking?
I took like a family therapy type of class, and I took a environmental, like like social work class. So I know one of the things that we had to do was like create an emergency preparation plan for our like home state or town or country. So like I did one on California, and it was like an emergency plan for California in case
Oh,
of
okay.
a natural disaster or something like that.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay, that is like super, super cool. So again, did you have was this other students with you or were
Yes,
you the
there were
only one?
other students with me. I was
Okay.
one of 8.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so we did not all live together. There was one male, so that kind of made the living situation a little different because there was only one of him. He actually stayed on campus in like a boys kind of dormitory situation.
Okay.
Because there were so many females, we stayed immediately outside of the campus in flats and homes. So like they rented us an apartment or a flat, and that's where we lived, right outside the campus.
And what would you say to people? Because people always want to know about India and women and safety and different things like that. So, how did you feel? Would you say that it's safe? Would you go back alone again? How was it in terms of that for you?
So I would say that it's relatively safe. Like I felt safe majority of the time. Um, I can say that the unsafest I felt was probably a little bit my fault.
Mhm.
Because I like to go out in the streets and turn up. And again, that is not necessarily a norm for women in their culture. So the time I did kind of feel unsafe, it was definitely like, oh, I wasn't just going to the grocery store. I was like out partying.
Okay.
Um, and we know what can happen. The same thing can happen to you here in America.
Right.
I would travel alone sometimes, like on the bus. I would walk places by myself. For the most part, it was fine. The only thing was like I would get stares because I didn't look Indian. And they knew I was foreign, and they were like, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" So that type of stare, but it wasn't like I felt like I was going to get like robbed or kidnapped or anything like that. I was also in a very safe area.
Okay, so that was like your school experience. So for those people that are no longer in school anymore and still want to do international social work, what would be kind of your advice for those people that are still looking to work abroad? Do you know life after the college experience?
I mean, while I was there, I really didn't, to be honest, I didn't hang out with a lot of students. I hung out with people that I met within the community. So that was my experience working with folks. And I think that it's a great opportunity. Um, One of the main things that I would think about is going into the space not being an expert, and really when it comes to culture and environment. Of course, within social work, you're there to work. So definitely bring your expertise and your knowledge, but also be open and accepting to how things are done, even within the field of social work that may not be within, your norm. It's not what we do here in the States, but there's ways to work collaboratively, um, interculturally.
Okay. And so have you worked abroad after that experience?
I have not worked abroad after that experience. That was my experience working. I wouldn't be opposed to it. The workspace I'm in right now, I work with a lot of amazing professionals, and a lot of them have worked internationally. They have, told me they think I would be great at doing, some of the work that they may have seen or done themselves. So it's something that I'm not opposed to, but just got to find the right time and the right opportunity.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit life after school. Can you just talk about some of the roles that you've had as a social worker and then leading into what you kind of do now?
Sure. So for the most part, I worked with adults with severe mental illness. That was kind of my jam. I found that jam when I was an undergrad. I took what was called abnormal psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really talking about some of the more pervasive mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder for like psychotic symptoms. So that was something that really interested me. And previously, I wanted to be a criminal profiler and work for the FBI. So you
Mm-hmm.
probably can imagine why that also was like a topic of interest. So
Do you
primarily,
what? Are you a SUV Law and Order person?
yeah. No, for sure. Like, yeah, all
Okay.
the time, every day. I listen to a crime podcast in the shower, like in the car. So yeah. um,
Randomly, I used to watch. Oh my god, it was on TV1, and it was about crimes, but it was all black people.
oh yeah, I feel like I've seen shows like
It's
that. Like BET has a new one with Lisa Ray as the like host.
I
What's it
think
called? Murder in the Thirst.
okay. I've seen the previews, but I haven't watched it. So I used to watch that show on TV1 every single day. But I started having dreams after a couple months. I was like, oh shoot, I have got to stop watching. So I had to stop watching it. But
I
other than that, I loved it.
I feel that. I've been there with the dream thing with clients, which kind of also led to my like, oh, maybe I should do something else. So yeah, I worked in like I was a case manager before. Then I went to like lead case management, program management. However, it was all in direct client services, focusing on folks with severe mental illness. And then when I kind of left the mental health specific organizations or agencies, I went to housing, which focused on folks who are chronically homeless, who were medically vulnerable, and this almost a lot of times includes severely mentally ill. So there's always that intersection there. So I kind of stayed within that space. I did a lot of crisis management. That was kind of like my jam. So working with folks in crises when there's like the wild situation going on that most people are like, oh my God, that just sounds too scary. I probably was like the lady there at 1 a.m, like, okay, let's get through this crisis. So I did that in DC, Maryland, and then I moved back to LA and did program management and social services management with folks experiencing homelessness and or folks who were criminal justice involved or mentally ill. That was my thing. The
That was your
folks who were
track.
the hardest to work with and the most vulnerable and probably the most shunned from society or by society. Those were the people I worked with.
But it sounds like you seem to thrive in those particular areas.
Definitely was an opportunity to thrive. I did. It is very stressful at times. It does require a great amount of like just insight into yourself and talk and like doing self-care. That was one of the things when I would have dreams about a client or a situation, I would take the next day off. Just because I knew that probably meant I was just being kind of overcome with whatever the situation was. So I had to be really careful about that. Um, I
Because
definitely have
I
some
do think
scary
working
situations.
with those type of population or clients, I feel like you begin to take on some of the stuff that you're constantly working with, right? Even if it's not your issue, you're constantly in this mode, and you're also in a constant of crisis with them. So not that you're panicking, you're the calm person, but that can take a toll on you if you're always in that same particular space or you're always trying to put out fire. Sometimes you want somebody put out your fire. And you're
Yeah,
always the
yeah,
savior person. You're like, somebody save me.
yeah.
And so it's like we love social work, but at the same time, it comes with some type of, some stuff that we don't particularly like about it. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that you can go into this work and love it and know that you're here to help people, but you're a human and transference is real.
real,
Vicarious
exactly.
trauma is real. So it's important for you, even as a social worker, to have a therapist, to
Right.
have a good circle, a support circle. If it's just your friends, sometimes your friends and family, though, will get overwhelmed with hearing about the things in your day. So that's why it's great to have a good professional circle. So those people
Right.
who know the struggle and they can listen to it without being too disturbed. And then also, of course, like having your own therapist so you can process some of the really difficult things that can come up in doing social work.
Right, exactly. And utilizing your supervisor, different things like that to
And
bounce ideas off
supervision and all of
of.
that. Like there's
Exactly.
just so many ways for you to have support. So it's important to like know those ways and really utilize them to try to avoid burnout.
What was my question? Okay, so tell me what you currently do. And then I'm gonna ask you, I saw this in a Black girl social work group. It was like, what was your worst job ever? So I want to know what was your best and what was your worst job without naming any names. But first we're gonna go into what do you currently do now as a social worker?
um, so right now as a social worker, I work for a consulting and management firm that focuses on systems level change in the behavioral health and healthcare spaces.
So that was a lot. So you gotta explain to us what that means.
So basically, lots of entities will get money, either federal money, state money, and then they need folks to kind of help them manage the money, make sure it goes out to people. What is the funding focusing on? So we give out grants, we select the people for the grants, we we work with folks during the entire grant funding period to make sure that they are utilizing best practices in spending the money. They're utilizing best practices when working with folks in the community. And we provide them support through technical assistance and training to ensure that happens. So,
So if there are people looking for, if there are these only the entities related to healthcare, and you mentioned something else, are these the only people that can apply for grants, or what other people can apply for these grants, or do the people already have grants when they come to you and you're helping on the back?
no, so basically, there's a lot of legislation that happens that determines that states and counties are going to get funding. They get that
Okay.
funding, and it's very specific funding to address a specific problem. So that's why it's usually related to policy. And then we will release information about the funding. And if you fall within the eligible pool of folks, then you may apply for funding.
Okay, okay, okay,
So
okay.
like you can't call me and say like, "Hey, I need a grant because I want to start a daycare." Do you know of a grant? Because I don't.
Okay,
I
okay.
get that question a lot when I talk about grant funding. People think grants are free money, and sometimes they are, but these are not free. They require a lot of planning
They're
and
attached to
and
requirements.
yeah, and financial budgeting and requirements. It's you got to jump through some serious hoops, and you have to be a
Okay.
very specific entity to get the funding. And when I meet people who I feel like they work with an organization or they may be eligible for funding, I generally will tell them like, "Hey, you know what? We got a grant opportunity coming up. Let me give you some information. Look into this."
Okay. Okay. So, let's jump back into that other question. What's the worst social work job you've ever had? And then what's the best one that you've ever had?
I think the worst one would definitely be the job before I have now.
Okay.
And it was in Los Angeles. I worked for a recuperative care, which is basically a hospital step down for folks experiencing homelessness.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so
And reason why?
it was a very toxic work
Okay.
culture or workplace. There were things that I did not agree with ethically, that were occurring. And this is ethics in the space of me being a social worker and thinking about the NASW and the ethics that we follow. It's very specific. And when you're licensed and registered with the state, you always have to keep those ethics in mind. So that was definitely one of the challenges. And then also, it was a little bit of a like racially unsettling environment. And to be honest, I got tired of white people telling me how to deal with people from my community that look like me, um, when I knew that they were not leading with maybe evidence-based practices, but white guilt or symptoms of white saviorism.
Ooh, interesting. I don't think we have time to even delve into that particular sentence alone, but you said a lot that we can have a whole nother topic about. So
Yeah,
that's super, super interesting. But I do feel like as social work, sometimes we tend to stay in places because we do want to help the community and different things like that. But if we find that it is toxic for our own self, it probably is time to move on. So I'm
yeah,
glad that you were able to kind of get out of that situation and to move into something which you seem to be happy with. So then I'll go to what
absolutely.
has been your best job. And
I
you don't have to say names or anything like
No,
that
no,
if
no,
you
no,
can.
no. I was like, I won't. But I will say that I think my best job was my first job out of undergrad. That job allowed me experience, allowed me opportunities for growth. It allowed me like space to build friendships. It allowed me opportunities to feel really great about the work I was doing, but also at times I felt really shitty. And I think that was just a part of the process. And it helped me determine, like, oh, I'm going to go to grad school for social work. Oh, I like working with this population. Oh, I don't do particularly well with this diagnoses. So it was just really a great foundational place. I was happy there for the most part. When I wasn't happy, it was really related to just like my own internal struggles, or the struggles of doing this really challenging work. It wasn't necessarily because of my job. It also allowed me like space and opportunity to speak up for myself in the workplace. There were many more lessons to come about that, but that was a great starting point.
Right. I think that is great because I think sometimes we don't speak up. Maybe we're afraid of management. Maybe it's not supportive, even if we do speak up. But I think if you are speaking up, that's very, very important because we have to be advocates for other people. Therefore, we have to be advocates for ourselves as well. So I think that's important. So, do you have your license? Are you licensed?
I am not licensed. I have probably about two-thirds of my hours for my California license. Um, and there is like a little bit of reason I'm not licensed. Really, it's because of the transition into the work that I'm doing now. Because I would have been done with my hours because I was registered with the state of California, have, taken the study courses for the ethics and the law and ethics exam that's required, and know about all the additional courses you have to take in California if you didn't go to grad school here. So yeah, I am still unlicensed, and I don't know that I actually am gonna complete my hours. Like, it could be great, but I'm also enjoying the space I'm in.
Okay. So what do you have what advice do you have for new social workers that are coming to the field, then mapping out their journey? And we didn't even talk about money and in terms of income and different things like that. What advice do you have for them? I know that's a lot to cover, but what advice do you have for people covering some of those topics that are entering the field, or even if they're already in the field, because we can change at any time our social work trajectory.
So we might have to go back because my little brain is like, what?
Okay.
So squirrel. So you wanted to know like what advice do I have for people coming into the field or already in the field about compensation?
About income, because a lot of times we talk about social workers don't make a lot of money, but I feel like that's untrue depending on what route you go into.
Mhm.
So speaking about income, and then just giving advice on if they're new social workers into the field, should they come into the field, should they not, like just advice
Okay,
overall.
cool. So as far as compensation goes, I would say my first piece of advice is always negotiate your salary. Um, Always know your worth, especially this conversation is for anybody, but I want to encourage always, of course, Black women who are consistently underpaid, and there is data to display that, that you do that. And if someone is not willing to pay you your worth, that you're like, all right, cool, bye. Because you do have that ability, you are worth that, and if they can't pay you, somebody else will. To be honest. So that's the first thing. I just noticed that so many people, especially like even coming right out of grad school, we were talking about jobs and like salaries that were being offered, and I was hearing what people were making, and I was like, you make that? Like, dang, that's crazy. Like, you accepted that? You making in the 30,000s and you got a master's degree? Granted, I got my master's degree like 10 years ago, but being in the 30,000s then was not acceptable. Um, so that's the one thing I have to say is like negotiate, because I wasn't any better than them. It was just the fact that I was like not willing to accept less than. So that's my first bit of advice. If you are interested in social work, by all means, go for it. I like think that we need more social workers. We need more diversity within the field, especially Black male social workers are super necessary. Y'all are like unicorns, but you
Right.
definitely have a place. You definitely have a place here, and there's a need for it. I think that if you want to transition into social work from some other field, I think that's great. I just don't think you should call yourself a social worker because you randomly did case management, but you're really a journalist. There's a lot of work and effort and education that goes into that. So that is not a moment of shade. That is just really about respecting the journey that people have taken to be a part of this field.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that your heart isn't in the right place. It doesn't mean that you're not qualified. It just means that like you should really take advantage of opportunities to learn more about some of the more technical pieces of the work.
Absolutely. And then lastly, we'll just kind of leave at this, that social workers are very diverse.
They
If you want to
are.
be in the medical field, the education field, the political field, I know somebody who works for the NFL. I think I even heard Target
Yes.
was hiring at one point for social workers.
Corporate
So
social work is a thing now. And that's a great way to get that coin. Like if you like, I want to be social work, but I need to make more than six figures, or not more than six figures, because that's a whole nother field you're in if you're doing that. But
right.
you want to be in the six-figure range. Hey, I'm in the six-figure range. And I don't, necessarily struggle. I live a pretty decent life. And I'm a social worker. And I don't take people's kids from their homes. Like,
Right.
who would have thought?
Right.
So
That's the biggest misconception, that that's all social workers do. I'm like, yeah, that's not all that we do.
I've
And I
never
worked in
taken
that
a
field
child.
too.
I've never taken a child out of a home. Um,
I have, but that's not all. And that's I did that. How many? I did that
And
so
to
many
the
years
social
ago.
workers who do, it's extremely challenging. It's really hard. It's emotionally taxing. So, yes, no shade to people who do take it, but that's not all social workers do. And I think that people think that they're like, oh, you take kids or you work at the county building or, whatever. Like, no, I actually, when I tell people I'm a social worker, they are actually usually surprised. Like, I've been in the airport in like my business clothes and like, ooh, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a social worker, but I work like as a healthcare consultant. So there's just so many different things you can do.
Right. Which is hilarious because people see that I travel all the time. So I get inboxes. So Tiffany, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm a social worker. And I think they're so disappointed. And I'm like, yeah, we can do this and we can do that. Like we can definitely combine them. So it's super hilarious when I tell people that, because I know in the back of my head they're gonna come back with the comment like, oh, that's what you do, or I thought you did this, or oh, okay. So I think it's funny, but the whole point of this is just to let you know that social work is super, super diverse. I'm glad that we have a month dedicated to kind of showcase who we are. And just know that if whatever, I feel like whatever you put your mind to do, whatever with your degree, I think that you can do it. And you see examples of like Ashlye or other people that are in the field, like you said, that's making the money, creating their own path. And like you said, whether or not you get your license or not, if you're making the money, which is a lot of reasons why we do get the license, is for the money. That's also showing alternative that you don't have to, but you
and
could
deal with
if you want to.
insurance companies, because that's something when you get licensed, if you accept insurance, you also have to accept, the things that come along with that, which I don't hear people always happy about. So I'm like, I might be kind of avoiding a little bit of a struggle.
Okay. Okay. Well, whatever your decision is, we're flowing with what you're doing.
Thank
But
you.
but
Me
I'm so happy
too.
that I met Ashlye because I always love my fellow Black social workers. They don't have to be Black, but something special about us as women and being Black and being social
Plus,
workers.
right?
And what is that? What is it? One year it was like the superpower, like it was the SW. I don't know if you remember that. It was like a logo or something. Anyway, that's another time for another conversation. Anyway, Ashlye, if people want to find you, do you have social media or anything where they can reach out to you if they have further questions about what you do or just about what you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to know about me in a like fun, free space, Instagram is great. Snooty Fox is my name, and it's SNOOTIE_FOXX. And I have a LinkedIn also, and you can find me on LinkedIn with my first name and last name. You see, my first name is spelled a little different. So it's ASHLYE. And my last name is Darrell. I can give you a link to my LinkedIn if you want to like put that up, Tiffany. It's more than fine, and I'll provide that information. But yeah, I'm
Yes.
pretty much open book. So if you got questions, hit me up.
Yes, we will definitely put all of that in the description box so that you can reach out to her. And I love having these conversations because I haven't done a social work conversation in a while. So this was good. So thank y'all
Thank
so
you.
much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for the conversation.